Robert was a fellow seemed to hypnotize an audience. You know, he didn't have a loud, strong voice, but his singing was very haunting.
That song, Love in Vain, my name is you. Robert posed that song concerned about me.
He believed that there were something that would make him more prosperous. And so then he reached out.
Robert Johnson was a famous blues musician, but his life was full of mystery. Some people say he made a deal with the devil to become great at playing the guitar. He died young, and the cause of his death is still unclear.
He knew that Uncle Robert was a drinker. And so, as they say, they slipped him a Mickey.
Many secrets surround his life, and some are very disturbing. What was the truth about Robert Johnson? Let's uncover the hidden story behind this blues legend.
Whenever I listen to Robert Johnson's music, I think he's probably the prime example of how America was back in those times.
Robert Johnson was born in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. His mother was Julia Major Dodds, and his father was likely a man named Noah Johnson. However, Julia was married to Charles Dodds, a landowner and furniture maker. Charles had to leave town because of a dispute with white landowners, so Julia took baby Robert and later moved to Memphis. There, Robert lived with Charles, who had changed his name to Charles Spencer. He went to school in Memphis and learned subjects like reading, math, music, and geography. This education made him different from most blues musicians of his time. He also fell in love with music in the city, especially the blues. When Robert was around 8 or 9 years old, he rejoined his mother. She had married a sharecropper named Will Dusty Willis. When Robert found out who his real father was, he changed his last name to Johnson. In 1929, he married a 14-year-old girl named Virginia Travis, but sadly, she died during childbirth.
And he wanted to have this baby, very likely because he loved her so much.
Some people believe this was punishment because Robert played the devil's music, meaning blues songs instead of gospel. This idea of him making a deal with the devil to gain musical talent followed him for the rest of his life.
Robert was a fellow seemed to hypnotize an audience. You know, he didn't have a loud, strong voice, but his singing was very haunting.
Robert lived in different places, had relationships with different women, and even fathered a child. He married again in 1931, but his wife died soon after. He did not settle down again. Instead, he became a traveling musician, moving from town to town. He played in places like Memphis, Arkansas, and Mississippi. He sometimes traveled as far as Chicago, Texas, New York, and even Canada. He had a habit of staying with friends, family, or women he met while performing. In each town, he used different names, making it hard for people to track him.
But I know he drank a whole lot. He liked to drink, and he liked his women. He's crazy about his women. We're all for that concern, but he was.
People who knew Robert described him as well-mannered but quiet. He was friendly in public but liked to keep to himself. He was also known for loving whiskey and women. When he arrived in a new town, he would play music on street corners or in front of businesses. He didn't always perform his own songs, but played popular songs that people liked. He had an incredible ability to hear a song once and play it perfectly. He also had a talent for making a connection with the audience.
He could play a guitar with two hands and make it sound like there were two guitars being played by four hands. No one has ever figured out how he did it, to this day.
Talking about Robert and the guitar. At first, he wasn't very good. He could barely play a tune. People who heard him said he had no real skill. Then, something strange happened. Robert left town for a while. Nobody knew exactly where he went or what he was doing. But when he came back, everything had changed. He could suddenly play better than anyone else. He was doing all kinds of guitar tricks, fast riffs, smooth chord changes, and even playing songs after just hearing them once.
I think he's the greatest folk blues guitar player that ever lived, and the greatest singer, the greatest writer.
It all happened so fast that people were confused. How could someone go from not knowing how to play to becoming one of the best guitarists anyone had ever seen? It didn't make sense. Some people began to whisper that there was something unnatural about it. They said Robert Johnson had made a deal with the devil. According to legend, if a guitarist wanted great skill, he had to go to a crossroads at midnight. He would take his guitar, sit down, and play the best song he could. While playing, he would hope for the devil to come. The story says that a dark figure, sometimes called the Black Man, would appear. This figure would take the guitar, tune it, and then hand it back. From that moment, the guitarist would be able to play anything. But there was a price. He had to give up his soul. People who believed in this story said that this was exactly what Robert Johnson had done.
I never seen him have to practice anything like that. Never seen him sit down and learn a song. He already knew it. Once he attempted to play it, he knew it.
They thought that he had met the devil at the crossroads and traded his soul for musical talent. It was the only explanation they could think of for how he improved so quickly. Even today, people still talk about this legend. Many don't know Robert Johnson's music, but they know his name because of this story. The idea of selling one's soul to the devil to gain skill is something that has fascinated people for a long time. However, there is another, more realistic explanation for how Robert Johnson became such a great guitarist.
He could play a guitar with two hands and make it sound like there were two guitars being played by four hands. No one has ever figured out how he did it, to this day.
Some researchers believe that Robert didn't make a deal with the devil at all. Instead, they say he spent time learning from a skilled guitarist named Ike Zinnerman. Ike was a master of the blues and knew how to play the guitar in ways that few others could. He took Robert under his wing and trained him. According to stories from people who knew them, Robert and Ike would sit together for hours at night, playing guitar and learning from each other. They would study different ways to play, practice new techniques, and perfect their skills. Ike's wife even said that they would sometimes play all night, sitting in chairs across from each other, deeply focused on their music.
Anything a fella could do on a piano, he could do it on the guitar.
This explanation makes a lot more sense than the devil story. Robert Johnson didn't suddenly wake up one day as a great guitarist. He worked hard, trained with an expert, and improved his skills over time. But because people love exciting stories, the legend of the crossroads became more popular than the truth. When these photos were found, music companies became interested in his recordings. Columbia Records, which later became Sony, released a collection of his songs in 1990. This brought new attention to his music and made him famous worldwide. If those photos had never been found, Robert Johnson's music might have been forgotten. Some people believe that Robert Johnson's grandmother, Carrie Thompson, played a big role in making him a legend. However, she never got much credit or money for it. While companies made millions from his music, she only received a small amount of money. Another person who played a big role in keeping Robert Johnson's music alive was Stephen LeVere. He spent years researching Robert Johnson's life and music. He made sure that the photos and recordings were protected so they wouldn't become public property. If that had happened, nobody would have been able to make money from them. Because of LeVere's work, Sony and others earned millions. Meanwhile, Robert Johnson's family got almost nothing. Robert only became famous after his death. As earlier said, some people even said he made a deal with the devil to become a great guitarist. These stories were not true, but they made his music more popular. Record companies realized that this spooky tale made people curious, so they used it to sell more records. Instead of seeing Johnson as a hardworking musician, people started thinking of him as part of a ghost story. This is not fair because he was a real person who worked hard to be good at his craft.
Record companies did own the rights. They paid for it, and that was it. They owned it.
Some artists have even created pictures of Robert Johnson with devil-like features, giving him horns and red skin. These images may look interesting, but they are not respectful. They make him seem like something he was not. Instead of focusing on his real struggles and talents, these pictures turn him into a fantasy character. Many African American musicians and listeners do not like this because the blues is about real emotions, not about magic or demons. The blues was created by people who used music to express their feelings about life, love, and pain. Turning it into a spooky tale takes away from its true meaning. Robert Johnson's sister, Annie C. Anderson, wanted people to know the real story about her brother. She wrote a book called Brother Robert, Growing Up with Robert Johnson, where she shared memories of him. She said that he was a kind and generous person who loved music. He worked hard to become great. He was not a mysterious figure with supernatural powers, but a real man who practiced a lot and learned from other musicians. She wanted people to respect his true story instead of believing in made-up legends.
And I said, by the way, do you happen to have a picture of your brother? And she said, you know, I do.
For many years, people believed there were no photographs of the famous blues musician Robert Johnson. No one knew what he really looked like. Then, in the 1970s, 3 photos were found. These photos belonged to Johnson's half-sister, Carrie Thompson. 2 of them became well-known, the dime store photo and the studio portrait. These photos showed Johnson at different times in his life. In the 1980s, a man named Stephen Levere got the rights to these pictures. He made a deal with Johnson's family to share any money made from them. The first photo was published in Rolling Stone magazine in 1986, and the second appeared in another magazine in 1989. These photos were later used in a collection of Johnson's music and became famous.
When Carrie Thompson brought that photograph of Robert Johnson and put it in my hands, I took one look at it and I said to myself, is this an album cover or what?
In the 1990s, a court decided that Johnson's real heir was his son, Claude Johnson. This meant that any money from the photos went to Claude, not to Carrie Thompson's family. There was also another photo that Johnson took with his nephew Louis. This picture was given to a man named Mac McCormick in 1972, but he never returned it. After McCormick passed away, his family gave his collection to a museum. In 2023, the museum agreed to return the missing photo to Johnson's family. However, this photo has never been made public. In 2008, another picture was published in Vanity Fair magazine. This photo claimed to show Johnson with another musician, Johnny Shines. Some experts said the photo was real, but others disagreed. They pointed out that the clothes in the picture were from a time after Johnson's death. There were also signs that the picture had been changed. When experts used face recognition software, it did not match Johnson or Shines. Some people who knew Johnson personally also said the photo was not him. In 2015, another photo appeared. It showed a man who was said to be Johnson, along with his wife, Coletta Craft, and 2 other people. Again, some people believed it was Johnson, while others disagreed. Experts pointed out many problems with the picture. For example, the type of clothes, furniture, and even a Coca-Cola bottle in the background were all from the 1950s. This was long after Johnson had died. Also, records showed that Kraft had passed away before Johnson even met the other people in the photo. In 2020, another picture was published. This time it was from Johnson's stepsister, Annie Anderson. She said she was there when the photo was taken. This picture showed Johnson smiling, and experts believe it is real. It was printed in Vanity Fair and used as the cover for a book about Johnson's life.
And I could not help but cry, all my love's in vain.
Now let's talk about the copyright battle with the song Love in Vain. The song Blues Song was written by Robert Johnson. He recorded it in 1937, and it was later released in 1939. The song is about a man who is sad because the woman he loves is leaving him. The lyrics describe his pain as he watches her go. Many people consider it one of Johnson's best songs because of its deep emotion and beautiful melody. Years later, the Rolling Stones recorded their own version of Love in Vain in 1969. Their version became very popular and introduced the song to a new audience. However, there was a big problem. The Rolling Stones version listed the songwriter as Woody Payne instead of Robert Johnson. This led to a legal fight over who really owned the song's rights. The legal battle happened because blues songs from the early 1900s often had unclear copyright records. Many blues musicians were poor and did not have legal help to protect their songs. Some record companies took advantage of this and gave credit to other people. This was a common problem for black musicians in that time. Johnson's estate, which represents his family, fought in court to prove that Robert Johnson was the real writer of Love in Vain. They wanted to make sure his family received the money from the song's use. The case was not easy because the song was very old, and the records from that time were not clear. However, after many arguments in court, the judge ruled that the rights to Love in Vain belonged to Johnson's estate. This case showed how complicated copyright laws can be, especially for old blues songs. Many early blues musicians did not get credit or payment for their work. Some of their songs were even claimed by other people. The court's decision was important because it helped protect the rights of Johnson's family and set an example for similar cases. Even though Robert Johnson died young and did not see success in his lifetime, his music has had a huge impact. His songs have been covered by many famous musicians, and Love in Vain remains one of his most powerful songs.
All my love's in vain.
The court's ruling made sure that his name stayed connected to his work and that his family benefited from his talent.
But I think what is so important with LaVer's efforts is that he made sure that the music and the photographs were copyrighted, which had never been done.
Carrie Thompson, his grandmother, only received about $300, and her family never saw any more money. Many people felt this was unfair, especially since the photos of Robert Johnson were used on album covers. It seemed like the music companies cared more about profit than giving credit to his family. In 1992, the case of who owned Robert Johnson's estate took an unexpected turn. A lawyer named Jim Kitchens came forward with shocking news. He said that Robert Johnson had a son. This was surprising because, for more than 50 years, people believed that Robert had died without any children. His half-sister, Annie Anderson, was thought to be his only living relative and had been in charge of his estate. But if Robert Johnson had a son, then legally, that son would be the rightful owner of everything.
And Annie and Robert were named as her sole heirs in equal parts.
The court started looking into the case. If Robert Johnson did have a son, then Annie Anderson would lose her rights to his estate. The court removed her as the executor or manager of his estate. Instead, they put someone else in charge and asked for any potential heirs to come forward. Many people suddenly claimed to be related to Robert Johnson. They saw the chance to get money and wanted to prove they were family. However, most of these claims were false. Then, in 1992, Jim Kitchens said he had found the real son of Robert Johnson. His name was Claude Johnson. This discovery changed everything. Claude Johnson was born in 1931 in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. His mother was a woman named Virgie Smith. She had met Robert Johnson when he was traveling and playing music. According to Claude's family, Virgie was Robert's first love, and she had a child with him. This claim was taken seriously, and after legal battles, Claude Johnson was declared the rightful heir to Robert Johnson's estate.
The greatest rags to riches story in the history of rags to riches story.
This meant he now owned his father's music and anything that came from it.
Before he died, he crawled on his hands and knees and barked like a dog.
Robert sadly died at only 27 years old. His sudden death has remained a mystery for many years. People have come up with different theories about how he died. Some say he was poisoned by a jealous husband. Others believe he died from an illness. No one knows for sure, and this has led to many stories and speculations.
He knew that Uncle Robert was a drinker, and so As they say, they slipped him a Mickey.
Johnson was playing music at a dance in Mississippi when he became very sick. Some people believe that he flirted with a married woman, and her husband became angry. The husband is said to have poisoned Johnson's drink. A fellow musician, David Honeyboy Edwards, claimed he saw Johnson take a bottle of whiskey from the woman. Edwards tried to warn him, saying he should never drink from a bottle he did not see being opened. But Johnson ignored the warning. Later, he took another bottle, and soon after, he fell ill. People who were with Johnson said he started feeling unwell that same night. He had to be helped back to his room because he was too weak to walk on his own. Over the next few days, his condition got worse. He was in great pain and could barely move. Some witnesses said he died while shaking violently, which suggested he was poisoned. But no one could prove it because no doctor examined his body. Some experts think Johnson was poisoned with strychnine, a type of poison often used to kill rats. However, others say this is unlikely. Strychnine has a very strong smell and taste that cannot be hidden, even in alcohol. Also, strychnine kills quickly, usually within hours, but Johnson took days to die. This makes some people doubt that he was poisoned in this way. Another theory is that he was poisoned with mothballs. Some people in the rural South used mothballs to poison others. While mothballs are not usually deadly, Johnson may have already been sick, making the poison more dangerous. Some researchers believe he had stomach problems, including ulcers, which could have made the poison much more harmful. Witnesses say he suffered from severe stomach pain, vomiting, and bleeding before he died. Even though poisoning is a popular theory, others believe Johnson died from a disease. Some experts think he had syphilis, a common illness at that time. It was a serious disease that could cause many health problems, including death. The man who owned the land where Johnson died told a registrar that he believed Johnson died of syphilis. Since no doctor examined him, there was no official proof, but it remains one of the possible causes. Another interesting idea is that Johnson may have had a rare genetic disorder called Marfan syndrome. This condition affects the body's connective tissues and can make a person unusually tall with long fingers.
Some men's got thick hands, heavy hands, but he had thin hands, small hands, keen fingers.
Some people who have looked at Johnson's photographs believe he had this condition. Marfan syndrome can cause heart problems, and in some cases, it can lead to sudden death. This could explain why Johnson died so suddenly and painfully. One of the biggest mysteries about Johnson's death is that it was not reported publicly at the time. It took nearly 30 years for someone to find his death certificate. A researcher named Gail Dean Wardlow discovered it while studying Johnson's life. The certificate only listed the date and place of his death, but did not say how he died. Since no official records were kept, people started to make their own guesses about what happened. Johnson was buried in a simple wooden coffin provided by the county. The exact location of his grave is also unknown. Some people believe he was buried in one place, while others think he was buried somewhere else. This has made his death even more mysterious. Many people have tried to find the truth, but the real cause of Johnson's death remains unknown. Blues music. Some even believe he sold his soul to the devil to become a great musician. His sudden and painful death only adds to the mystery surrounding his life. People will likely continue to debate what really happened to Robert Johnson, but the truth may never be known.